Hello everyone, this is Dr. Geri Puleo, and I'd like to welcome you to this mini webinar on the real cost of burnout, or how to calculate the cost of workplace stress. Well, the first question that you probably have is, why do we need to even try to put a financial measurement on something as intangible or subjective as feelings of stress in your workers? Well, the reason is that numerous studies have approached this question, and they have consistently discovered that the results of stress cost employers between 200 and 300 billion dollars per year. Now, that's a lot of money in anybody's book. So the next question then is, what exactly causes employee stress? And according to some research done using the Holmes-Rahe Life Event Scale, they found that the workplace is the #1 source for creating stress within its human workers. Now, how does this come about? There's a lot of different things in the workplace that can stress you out. Firing, termination, downsizing, layoffs. It can either be you personally, or it can be the stress associated with survivor syndrome, which means other people have been laid off and you feel guilty to still have a job. Any type of business readjustment or organizational change, changes in your financial status. Has the company put a freeze on promotions or bonuses or pay increases? The other thing that creates a great deal of stress, and many of us have experienced it, is the creep in your job responsibilities. You got hired to do the job with certain duties, tasks, and responsibilities, and now, due to changes in the marketplace, you find that you have to do even more, which leads to a work overload. Sometimes what happens is technology has eliminated your job altogether, and you discover that you need to switch to a totally different line of work. It may be with your current employer, or you may have to go work for someone else. Then probably I think one of the #1 reasons that workers are stressed out is if they don't have a good relationship with their direct manager. In fact, studies have shown that the #1 reason why employees leave a company is due to a poor relationship with their manager. If you take a look at how many hours people are working, 40-hour work weeks, unfortunately, are not very common anymore. And any type of a variation in your work hours or your terms and conditions of employment can be inherently stressful. And finally, the concept of retirement. Many people don't have enough financial cushion to retire in the way that they had anticipated. So let's take a look at burnout by the numbers. 60%. Believe it or not, each year, the percent of lost workdays associated with employee stress is 60%. So over half the time that employees do not come to work or are absent is related to the fact that they're burned out and stressed out. In addition, between 75 and 90% of every visit to your primary care physician, or PCP, is somehow related to feelings of stress and all of the different psychological and physiological ramifications of that stress on your body. And this is kind of scary. At any given time, approximately 33% of your workforce is considering quitting or leaving your employment due to their feelings of stress. And if that's not bad enough, about 14% of your workers, and often these are the star performers that you want to keep, 14% will quit because they are feeling very stressed out. So it behooves organizations to understand what causes stress how it affects their bottom line, and how to avoid it. So what exactly do you need to measure? That's always been the big question when it comes to workplace stress. Well, according to a study by Brune and his colleagues in 2006, they discovered 4 different categories of events, considerations, and factors in the workplace that need to be included in order to determine a really good financial understanding of what stress is causing your organization. And we're going to go over each one of these categories in more detail. The first area are costs related to baseline data. So what's included in baseline data? Well, this would be any absence related to a psychological disorder. As we all know, stress has a very profound impact on the way that you view the world and your psychology. Absenteeism. Absenteeism is probably one of the biggest indicators that you've got a burned out workforce. So what you need to calculate, just as your baseline, is what's the total number of absences per year? What are the total number of days that are lost to absenteeism? And that would be for all causes. In addition, you need to look at your basic workforce demographics and statistics. How many full-time employees do you have? What's the average annual number of days worked? What's the average hourly wage? Also, what are your financials? What are your annual sales? What kind of profit, or hopefully not, but loss you might be experiencing? You also need to look at your HR metrics. These include the rates of absenteeism, the turnover rates, internal mobility, as well as the overall costs of staff turnover. As I mentioned before, 14% of your workers are going to quit because they're so stressed out. So you need to look at that turnover rate. And the cost of turnover per individual employee, depending on their level in the organization, can run anywhere between 150 to 250% of their total salary. That's a lot of money that has an effect on your bottom line. And then finally, you need to try to get some calculations in terms of the prevalence of any psychological distress that your employees may be experiencing. So that was just the baseline costs. Now we're going to start really calculating the direct and indirect costs of burnout and stress on the workplace and also on your company's bottom line. So the first area is absenteeism. All the insurance-related costs, things such as disability and workers' compensation. Wage and salary costs, the costs associated with overtime, with hiring replacement workers, the costs associated with the paid sick leave or even the unpaid sick leave, because you do have to replace those workers with somebody else. There is, however, a certain amount of savings in terms of salary and benefits while a position is vacant. And unfortunately, a lot of companies have focused on that, and what ends up happening is work overload, that you have one employee doing the job of 2 or 3 workers. And when you think about work overload, you have to start looking at productivity. What are the costs associated with an employee who's returning to work? What about the reduced work time? And a salaried exempt worker is stressed out and leaves 2 hours early uh, on any given day. What about the loss of intellectual capital? One of the big things with burnout and high levels of stress is the fact that your brain's not functioning as well. And also, considering that 33% of employees are considering resigning from the organization due to stress, and 14% actually do, look at all that intellectual capital you could be losing. As I mentioned before, quantitative work overload for colleagues when you're trying to pick up the slack because each employee now does the work of 2 jobs instead of just 1, or the amount of work overload that a burned out, stressed out worker who's out on leave, all of that work that is going to his or her colleagues. The work still has to be done, so think of all the additional stress there. And consider also, in this age of work teams, the indirect harm that's inflicted upon the work team itself. With the stress levels, the work overload, there can be a lot of resentment when people are not there. Look at the technology. Look into your HRIS or HR information system for more information on absenteeism data. And then look at all the administrative costs that are involved with managing disability cases and bringing in outside medical expertise. All of these things are just a tip of the iceberg when calculating the cost of absenteeism. In the third area of costs, we're going to be talking about presenteeism. So presenteeism is when workers are on the job, but they're really not there. So they're kind of like going through the motions. So obviously there's going to be an increase in errors as well as a decrease in the quality of production. But the reason why these particular things are in red is because most companies don't keep any data on the increase in errors related to stress or the decrease in quality. But as we all know, if the productivity and the quality and the performance go down, it does have an effect on how well the organization competes in the marketplace, and so it's going to affect the bottom line. Fourth and final area would be those costs that are associated with both absenteeism and presenteeism. So we're talking about health insurance premiums for the psychotherapeutic drugs or alternative care, cost of your EAP, cost of bringing in external experts. If you're a unionized workplace, the cost of leave time, the time that's devoted to addressing mental health issues in the workplace. Legal costs, it's a biggie. People are beginning to sue now because of different legal violations that have their underpinning in a stressed out worker, especially a stressed out worker that is stressed because of the like a hostile work environment or something else in the workplace. Loss of productivity, again, it's in red because it's a very difficult thing to quantify. And then finally, the cost of prevention. Does your company actually have training and development in place to help these workers continue to perform at their optimum or maximized levels in a way that doesn't lead to workplace stress? So how do you calculate the cost of workplace stress? Well, you add all those things together. You take the economic costs related to absenteeism, plus all the economic costs related to presenteeism, plus all of the economic costs that are common to both absenteeism and presenteeism in order to get the total costs of stress to the organization. But you also have to consider these other things. All of the non-economic costs related to absenteeism, presenteeism, as well as those non-economic costs that are common to both absenteeism and presenteeism. The problem is they are mostly unavailable to companies because they don't track these things. So let's take a look at a sample organization. According to Brune's study, as I said, was done in 2006. The sample company had over $1.5 million related to the economic costs of absenteeism. However, they couldn't even begin to calculate the economic costs related to presenteeism. But the economic costs that were common to both absenteeism and presenteeism, and there's a specific category of those, was an additional $385,000. So the cost of stress to this one company was $1.95 million. That's in economic costs. But as I said before, there's non-economic costs. And those are unavailable costs that weren't even considered or added into the $1.95 million. So this would be the non-economic costs related to the quantitative work overload of employees, the indirect harm done to the work team, how many employees may be left because of the stress, the loss of the intellectual capital. Then you have to add to that the increase in errors, the decrease in quality, and the loss of productivity. Think of what that costs. And we don't have, this company didn't have good data to really quantify those costs, but we know that there's a cost to it. Add that to the 1.95 million. So conservatively, the cost of stress to that particular workplace would be well over $2 million. So what does all this mean? Well, burnout is reaching epidemic proportions in the workplace. Employee commitment, productivity, and overall performance are decreasing due to the high levels of stress and workplace and burnout in the workplace. So given this model for calculating the cost of stress to your workplace, isn't it about time, if you're an organizational leader, to stop the drain on your company's financial as well as human resources? It's up to you. You decide.